What would you do if you inherited $26 million overnight? This is the story of how a massive inheritance didn't just change my life, it exposed the truth. And if you want to see what happens when greed clashes with integrity, stick around. The family who barely visited them suddenly wanted everything. I refused. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about standing your ground when family shows their true colors. Growing up, my parents were always physically present but emotionally absent. My father, Richard, worked 60-hour weeks climbing the corporate ladder. My mother, Diane, spent her time networking with the right social circles. Family dinners were rare. From the age of 5, I spent every weekend and entire summers with my grandparents, Elizabeth and Harold. Their modest 4-bedroom house became my true home. Their 3-acre property had a vegetable garden where Grandpa Harold taught me to grow tomatoes and zucchini. Yet, you would never know their net worth by looking at them. Grandpa drove the same pickup truck for 20 years. They always told me, "Money is just a tool, Natalie, not a measurement of your worth. Use it to build something meaningful, not to impress people who do not matter." What he saw as deprivation, they saw as character building. When he graduated, they helped him with a down payment on a modest starter home. Not the luxury condo he wanted. The final break came when my father demanded a senior position at their company despite having no relevant experience. My grandparents refused, saying he needed to earn it like everyone else. For me, they took a different approach. They paid for my education in full, allowing me to graduate debt-free. But they encouraged me to choose a career based on passion rather than profit. When I decided to become a kindergarten teacher, they were genuinely thrilled, even though my starting salary was barely above minimum wage. We had standing Sunday dinners every week. I helped them navigate new technology, setting up their smartphones and showing them how to video chat. They taught me their family recipes and told stories about their youth. It was small but cozy, filled with secondhand furniture and plants. My salary at Sunshine Elementary School was modest, but it covered my needs. 6 weeks ago, everything changed. My grandparents had been driving home from their favorite restaurant when a drunk driver ran a red light, hitting their car at full speed. They died instantly. My brother Jason flew in from California, spending most of the time on his phone. Aunt Pam cried dramatically for photos but stopped the moment cameras were put away. Uncle Steve just stood awkwardly in corners, following Aunt Pam like a shadow. Yet suddenly they were acting like the grieving family. I just felt numb. Instead, I returned to my apartment, took bereavement leave from school, and tried to process my new reality. I arrived at Goldstein Legal 15 minutes early, dressed in a simple black dress. I was carrying the umbrella my grandmother had insisted I keep in my car for emergencies. Matthew Goldstein greeted me with a gentle handshake. "I am so sorry for your loss, Natalie," he said quietly. "They spoke highly of you too." My father, Richard, entered first, checking his expensive watch impatiently. My mother, Diane, followed, her designer handbag probably costing more than my monthly rent. My 25-year-old brother, Jason, swaggered in, wearing sunglasses indoors. Uncle Steve trailed behind, nodding politely to me but quickly averting his eyes. They had been married for 20 years, but I had rarely heard him speak more than a few sentences at family gatherings. "Some of us have actual businesses to run." Matthew smiled thinly. The tension in the room was palpable as we settled around a large oak table. My mother was next to my father, Jason next to her, and Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve across from them. They were thorough in their considerations and explicit in their wishes. My father snorted. "Just read it, Matt. Dad built the business. I'm his son." Matthew ignored the interruption and opened a leather portfolio. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Harold Alexander, and I, Elizabeth Alexander, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this our last will and testament." My family shifted impatiently. Finally, he reached the section everyone was waiting for. "We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including but not limited to all cash assets, totaling approximately $8 million. Our investment portfolio, valued at approximately $12 million. And our 25% ownership stake in Alexander Logistics, valued at approximately $1 million. The room went completely silent. I stopped breathing for a moment, certain I had misheard. Matthew continued, we specifically and intentionally make no provisions for our son Richard Alexander, our daughter-in-law Diane Alexander, our grandson Jason Alexander, our daughter Pamela Davis, or our son-in-law Stephen Davis, as we have provided for them during our lifetime and have made our reasons clear to our attorney. Let me see that, my father shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair tipped backward. My mother joined in. $26 million to a kindergarten teacher. She wouldn't know the first thing about managing that kind of money. What about me? I'm family too. What did you do? $26 million. My modest grandparents had accumulated that much, and they left it all to me. Harold and Elizabeth recorded a video message to be played at this time. He pressed a button on a remote, and the large screen on the wall illuminated. My grandparents appeared, sitting side by side on their living room sofa. If you are watching this, it means we have passed on. For decades, my grandparents explained, they had watched my father and aunt prioritize material wealth over relationships, treating them as a resource to be tapped rather than as parents to be cherished. It was about creating security for our family and opportunities for our employees. We built it through hard work, integrity, and treating people fairly. Natalie is the only one who has demonstrated these values consistently. She has chosen a career helping children despite the low pay because it fulfills her purpose. The video continued for several more minutes, with my grandparents expressing their hopes for how the inheritance might be used to support education and community development areas they had always cared about, but had limited time to address while running their business. This is absolute garbage. We will contest this will. Matthew remained perfectly calm. They anticipated that response, Richard. Additionally, they documented years of behaviors that informed their decision. I must advise you that contesting will be extremely difficult, expensive, and unlikely to succeed. My mother turned to me, her voice suddenly honey-sweet. Natalie, darling, you understand this isn't right. Your grandparents were confused. This money belongs to the family, not just you. I felt cornered, all eyes on me. I have to think about this, I stammered. I had no idea they would do this. Think about it? Jason scoffed. There's nothing to think about. As the arguing intensified, Matthew gently touched my arm. He handed me a thick envelope. Call me anytime with questions. This discussion is not over, he hissed. Come to our house tonight at 6. His tone made it clear this was not a request. I nodded numbly, too overwhelmed to argue. As they departed in their separate luxury vehicles, I sat in my 10-year-old sedan in the parking lot, clutching the envelope, and wondering how an inheritance meant to be a blessing had so quickly become a curse. Part of me wanted to peek inside to understand exactly what my grandparents had entrusted to me. I took a deep breath, grabbed the envelope, and headed inside. Finally, my father said when I entered, "Sit down, Natalie. Your grandparents clearly were not thinking clearly. They meant for the family to benefit, not just you. Sweetheart, managing wealth is complicated. Your father has the experience to handle this properly." The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl, but I remained silent. Emboldened by my lack of response, my father continued. "Here is what we propose. You sign over the estate to me as the financial head of the family. You will receive 10%, which is more than generous considering your limited needs. That would still be over $2 million. Exactly, Jason jumped in. More than enough for a teacher. I need at least $5 million for my cryptocurrency exchange platform. I looked at him skeptically. Jason had bounced between get-rich-quick schemes for years, never holding a job longer than 3 months. The house should go to us, Aunt Pam interjected. We have 3 children to consider. Aunt Pam had never once visited my grandparents in that house. Her children, my cousins, were strangers who sent obligatory birthday cards in my aunt's handwriting. When demands didn't work, they switched to guilt. After all we have done for you, my mother said, her eyes dramatically moist. We gave you life, a good home, opportunities. This is how you repay family loyalty. I nearly choked on my water. Loyalty. When did you ever attend one of my school performances? My father changed strategies again. Either you sign the transfer documents voluntarily, or we will contest the will. How often did you visit them alone? It will get ugly. The threat hung in the air. No one can take your dignity unless you give it away, Natalie, he had said. This is a lot to process. Stay out of this, Steve. This is family business. I am family, he responded quietly, but immediately retreated when my father glared at him. As the clock ticked past 9, Jason started drafting transfer paperwork on his laptop. My mother called their personal attorney for advice on the wording. Aunt Pam scrolled through real estate listings for my grandparents' house, talking about which wall she would knock down first. Not once did they ask what I thought should be done with the money. At 10:30, my father printed out the crude transfer document and slid it across the coffee table to me along with a pen. Sign it, he demanded. Now. I picked up the paper and read it carefully. The language was broad, essentially signing away all my rights to anything my grandparents had left me. In exchange, I would receive a percentage to be determined later at my father's sole discretion. I put the paper down and took a deep breath. What did you just say? My father asked, his voice dangerously low. I said no. I will not sign this or anything like it. Jason called me names I will not repeat. Aunt Pam began sobbing dramatically about her children's future. Through it all, I sat still, the word no becoming a shield around me. I always told Dad you were not to be trusted. He stalked toward me, pointing his finger inches from my face. You have a choice to make right now, Natalie. Either you sign that paper and remain part of this family, or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself disowned. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I found none. In that moment, I realized a painful truth. I was just a means to an end, a potential source of money, nothing more. I'm sorry you feel this way, but I have to respect what Grandma and Grandpa wanted. Then get out of my house, my father snarled. The apartment we co-signed for because your teacher salary couldn't qualify for the lease? Check your agreement, Natalie. Consider your lease terminated. My stomach dropped. When I couldn't qualify for the apartment on my own, they had offered to help. I never realized they actually owned the building through a shell company. They were actually kicking me out, making me homeless over money they had never earned. The clock is ticking, Jason smirked. 30 minutes isn't long to pack up your life. I moved on autopilot, grabbing clothes, toiletries, important documents, and a few sentimental items. How could they do this? How could money turn my family into complete strangers? My father stood in the doorway of my now former bedroom, arms crossed, watching me like a guard. My mother was already on the phone with a real estate agent about selling my grandparents' house, her voice carrying up the stairs. Consider this the end of our investment. Investment. Not love or care, but an investment, as if I were a stock that had performed poorly. That money will run out faster than you think. You'll come crawling back, and we will remember how you chose cash over family. I zipped up my final bag, fighting back tears. I was determined not to cry in front of them. Is that everything? My father demanded. So much left behind. I can come back for the rest later, I said. My father laughed. I would not leave that behind. With my bags in hand, I made my way downstairs. You might have money now, my mother said, but family is forever. You will realize what you have thrown away. You are. With that, I walked out the door and into the cool night air. Standing beside my car in the driveway, I suddenly felt the weight of everything crashing down. My apartment was no longer mine. In the span of a few hours, I had gained millions but lost the only support system I had ever known, flawed as it was. I sat in my car and finally allowed the tears to come. They streamed down my face as I gripped the steering wheel, great heaving sobs that made my whole body shake. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I wiped my eyes and started the car. Pulling it out, I found a set of keys with a familiar rabbit-shaped keychain my grandmother had cherished. The keys to my grandparents' house. The house that was now, unbelievably, mine. The drive to their neighborhood took 20 minutes. The porch light was on when I arrived, probably on a timer my grandfather had set. I sat in the driveway for several minutes, gathering courage. The house smelled exactly the same. A mixture of my grandmother's lemon verbena potpourri and the wood polish my grandfather used. I flipped on the lights, half expecting to hear their voices calling a greeting from the kitchen. The silence was deafening. I made my way to the guest room I had always used, dropping my bag on the bed. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Fresh towels were folded on the dresser, placed there by my grandmother in anticipation of my next stay. Morning came with disorienting brightness. For a moment, I expected to smell coffee brewing and hear my grandfather's off-key whistling. Then reality crashed back. They were gone. And somehow I had inherited both their fortune and their enemies, all in the form of my own family. My phone had blown up overnight with texts and missed calls, mostly from my father and mother, alternating between threats and sudden attempts at reconciliation. "We can work this out if you will be reasonable," read one message from my mother. My father was less subtle. "You have 24 hours to reconsider before we file suit." Jason sent a single text. That last one sent a chill down my spine. Sounded like a threat, not just bluster. I forwarded it to Matthew, who responded immediately. "Stay where you are. I will be there in 30 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone else." His urgency alarmed me but also provided a strange comfort. "First things first," he said, sliding a coffee toward me. "Your family has already contacted 3 different attorneys about contesting the will. I anticipated this and have prepared countermeasures." Matthew nodded grimly. "Using leverage to force compliance." He began pulling documents from his briefcase. He showed me a deed to a small cottage about 20 minutes outside town. "Your grandmother bought this property 5 years ago as an investment but kept it in a separate trust for you. At least I wouldn't be homeless. Your grandparents had many loyal friends and associates who understood the situation with your family." As if on cue, a knock sounded at the back door. Matthew smiled. "Carlos." The name was vaguely familiar. "He has been your grandparents' estate manager and handyman for 15 years. I answered the door to find a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. "Miss Natalie," he said warmly, "I am very sorry about your grandparents. They were wonderful people. I saw your car this morning and wanted to check if you needed anything." "Thank you, Carlos. I am a bit overwhelmed, to be honest." Mr. Harold and Mrs. Elizabeth worried about that. Over the next hour, Carlos shared stories about my grandparents that I had never heard, painting a picture of 2 people who were respected and beloved. "Your father and brother," Carlos said carefully. "They came here after the funeral when no one was around. They took things, watches, jewelry, some electronics. I have it all on the security cameras." Carlos shook his head sadly. "They didn't know Mr. Harold had me update the system last year. He didn't trust the old one your father put in. Said it had too many blind spots. That footage could be useful if they pursue legal action." I followed Carlos to my grandmother's small study. A built-in bookcase held dozens of leather-bound journals, each meticulously dated. May 15th. Richard visited today, first time in 7 months. Did not ask about our health or lives. When Harold refused, Richard became hostile, accused us of preferring Natalie. Natalie has never asked for money, has no idea of our net worth, brings food every Sunday, and stays to eat with us. I read entry after entry, each one documenting years of similar interactions. "Your grandparents' housekeeper for 20 years. Dorothy hugged me tightly. Over the next several hours, more people arrived. Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' business partner. They had all loved my grandparents and, by extension, cared about my well-being. She also found a USB drive with security footage from after the funeral. Around 4 p.m., my phone pinged with a text from Jason. Better not try to stop us or things will get ugly." I showed the message to Matthew, whose expression darkened. When he finished, he turned to me with a determined expression. "Your grandparents anticipated this exact scenario, Natalie." I spent the evening reading through journals and financial reports, getting to know my grandparents in a new way. They had been strategic, thoughtful, and meticulous. As I prepared for bed, another text came from Jason. "Better sleep with one eye open, sis. Tomorrow you'll see what happens to people who steal from this family." Tomorrow would indeed show what happens when people try to steal, but not in the way Jason imagined. By 8 a.m., Matthew had arrived with coffee and restraining orders ready to be filed. By 9:30, the house had filled with supporters. Carlos stood by the front door, a silent guardian. They were early, trying to catch us off guard. My father stood on the threshold, momentarily surprised. "Where is Natalie?" he demanded. "This is family business." Carlos remained immovable. "Miss Natalie is expecting you. Please come in." "What is this?" my mother asked, her voice brittle. "You brought outsiders into a private family matter?" Before I could answer, the front door opened again, and 3 more people entered. He was followed by Police Chief Maria Williams. My father's face paled at the sight of Judge Henderson. The judge's expression remained stern. "I am here at the request of Harold and Elizabeth Alexander, through their attorney. Unless, of course, someone commits a crime." The implied threat was not lost on any of us. "You have got to be kidding me," Jason muttered. I stepped forward, finding strength in the support surrounding me. "I know why you are here. You believe you are entitled to my grandparents' estate, despite their explicit wishes." My father's face hardened. "We are simply here to correct that injustice." From behind me, Thomas Jang spoke up. He opened a folder. "And your attempt to have Elizabeth declared incompetent last year." My father's face reddened. That's taken out of context." Rosa Martinez stepped forward, tablet in hand. "I also have records of the company loan you never repaid, Richard. $200,000, borrowed in 2012 for your vacation home in Aspen." One by one, my grandparents' friends and associates presented evidence of my family's greed. "This includes banking records, text messages, emails, and video evidence that would become public record if you contest the will," he said. "We should go," he said quietly to Aunt Pam. Chief Williams stepped forward. Carlos nodded. "The new system records everything, inside and out." As my family absorbed the implications, I walked over with the final documents. "These are notices that I am aware of the items taken from this house after the funeral and expect their immediate return," I told my father. Finally, I handed a paper to my mother. "They include respect for my grandparents' wishes and an end to all attempts to contest the will." The room fell silent as my family realized the position they were in. My father was the first to break. "This is not over," he said, but the defeat in his voice was clear. "Your parents were meticulous." One by one, my family retreated toward the door, their threats dissolving. "Not just of what you did today, but how you did it with dignity and principle." As my family's cars disappeared down the driveway, I realized I had crossed a threshold. The family I had known was gone, but in their place stood a community bound by genuine respect and shared values. It was not the family I was born into, but perhaps it was the family I was meant to have all along. The legal threats from my family faded away, once they realized their case was built on nothing but greed. With the help of Matthew and Rosa, I established the Elizabeth and Harold Alexander Foundation for Education. I still teach kindergarten, but now my classroom has every resource a child could dream of. Seeing their faces light up with the joy of learning is a greater return than any stock could provide. On Sundays, our chosen family, Matthew, Carlos, Rosa, Dorothy, and all the others, gather for dinner. We share stories, we laugh, and we support each other. A few weeks ago, I received a letter. It was from Uncle Steve. It was the first crack of light in the wall of family darkness. I don't know if we'll ever be close, but it's a start. Looking out at the crowd, I saw the ripple effect of my grandparents' kindness. And in giving, I've received more than I ever could have imagined. I have a purpose, I have peace, and I have a family bound by love, not by blood. My grandparents' story didn't end with that tragic crash. It's just beginning, through every child we help and every dream we support. And I know wherever they are, they're smiling. My grandparents' legacy taught me that the most valuable inheritance isn't money. It's the values you live by. I would love to read your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength and honoring what truly matters. Thank you for listening, and may you have the courage to build your own legacy of kindness.